All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling something maybe a bit unexpected. Ignorance.
Ignorance.
Yeah, but not just like not knowing stuff. Our source material on the nature of ignorance gets pretty philosophical about it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it brings in Wittgenstein, even touches on Advaita Vedanta. The idea is that ignorance might be more like our starting point rather than something we just gain over time.
Like it's the baseline.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that understanding things might involve as much unlearning as it does learning. Pretty wild stuff. But before we get too far into the deep end, one of the things that really struck me was this story about Wittgenstein. He asked his student why people used to think the sun went around the earth. Well, the student said, it looked that way, didn't it? And Wittgenstein goes, well, what would it have looked like if it had looked like the earth was turning?
Ah, I see. Gets you thinking, doesn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Like how much of what we consider natural is just, what we're used to assuming.
It's a powerful example of how easily we can mistake our habitual ways of seeing the world for, the absolute truth. It often takes a truly radical shift in perspective to break free from those deeply ingrained assumptions, right? Think about the Copernican revolution. It wasn't simply about new data. It was about a completely new way of understanding our place in the cosmos.
Right, exactly. It's like we get stuck in these mental grooves, and jumping out of them takes real effort. And then this whole idea that ignorance is our default state. Whoa. Mm-hmm. It's not that we were born knowing everything and then forgot. It's more like we start not knowing and then work towards knowledge.
It is a pretty mind-blowing concept when you really think about it, isn't it? We tend to think of knowledge like filling up an empty bucket, right? But what if instead it's more like chipping away at a block of, not knowing, revealing what was potentially there all along?
That is a powerful way to put it. Makes you realize how much we're shaped by what we don't know, even more than what we do. Makes you wonder if sometimes we're so busy learning new stuff that we forget to question the assumptions we're already carrying around.
Which is where the concept of avidya comes in.
Avidya.
Yeah, it's a term from the Vedantic tradition, often translated as ignorance. But it's not simply like a lack of facts, right? It's more fundamental. A kind of not knowing that shapes how we perceive reality itself.
Like a lens we're looking through without realizing it.
Exactly. Influences the questions we even think to ask, how we interpret our experiences, and it even makes those underlying assumptions invisible.
So avidya is creating blind spots in our understanding. How does that actually play out in our lives? Got any good examples?
Sure. Imagine explaining, say, the internet to someone who lived before electricity. Their whole framework for understanding communication would be so different. The very idea of the internet would be almost impossible to grasp.
Wow. Yeah. Their avidya would be massive in that case. Not just missing a few facts. It's a totally different way of understanding the world. But okay, if ignorance is so fundamental, how do we even begin to overcome it?
Philosophers and scientists have been wrestling with that for centuries. One idea, and it's a fascinating one, comes from Karl Popper. He argued that knowledge doesn't progress by just confirming what we already believe, but by actively trying to disprove our theories.
So be our own toughest critics, always looking for ways we might be wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's a process of conjecture and refutation. Make a bold guess, then test it rigorously, try to prove yourself wrong. A classic example is the physicists Albert Michelson and Edward Morley. They were trying to prove the existence of something called luminiferous ether.
Luminiferous what now?
Right. It was this supposed substance thought to be the medium that light waves traveled through. So their experiment, famously, failed to detect this ether. But that failure turned out to be a huge success for science, because it paved the way for Einstein's theory of special relativity, which didn't need the ether at all.
So sometimes being wrong can be a step toward being more right. It's like that saying, I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. But in reverse. Got to be willing to challenge what we think we know. But how do we know when we've actually landed on a good explanation? One that have real reach, as David Deutsch calls it.
Ah, yes. A good explanation, it doesn't just describe what we know. It connects things that seem totally separate, and it can predict new stuff we didn't even know to look for. Take Newton's law of gravity. It wasn't just about why things fall down. It connected the moon's motion, tides, even how distant stars behave.
Wow, that's incredible. Find these hidden patterns that connect everything. Makes you wonder what else is out there waiting to be discovered. Stuff that could completely change how we understand the world.
Absolutely, it does. And it reminds us that knowledge is an ongoing process. Even our most cherished theories are always subject to revision, right? Which brings us to a really interesting question. the nature of understanding, especially compared to artificial intelligence. We're seeing AI do amazing things these days, but can it truly understand the way humans do?
That is a fascinating question. I mean, AI can process info at incredible speeds, even learn from its mistakes. But is there something fundamentally different about human understanding? I'd love to hear more about that.
So last time we were talking about avidya, this idea from Advaita Vedanta, how it kind of creates the illusion of limitation where there's actually boundless consciousness.
It really got me thinking. It's both exciting and a bit intimidating, to think that we might be capable of experiencing something so much bigger than our everyday sense of self.
Yeah.
But how do we even begin to access that boundless consciousness? It all feels a bit abstract and out of reach, to be honest.
And that's where the practical side of Advaita Vedanta comes in. It's not just a philosophy, it's a path of self-discovery, emphasizing, direct experience. Think of it like this. You wouldn't expect to understand quantum physics just by reading about it, right?
Yeah.
Probably not, no.
You'd want to experiment, see those principles in action.
Okay, so how do we experiment with our consciousness then, to kind of break free from those limitations of avidya?
One of the most powerful tools is this thing called self-inquiry. It's basically systematically questioning our assumptions about who we are.
Questioning.
Yeah, like we start with the things we normally identify with. Our thoughts, our emotions, our bodies, even our roles, possessions. And we ask, is this really me?
So not just introspection, but actively challenging those deep down beliefs that make up our sense of self.
Exactly. And as we do this, we start to notice that all these things we identify with, they're constantly changing. Our bodies age, thoughts come and go, emotions ebb and flow. But there's something deeper there, something unchanging that's witnessing all of it.
That awareness, right. That's always there, no matter what's happening inside or outside.
Yeah. And as we cultivate that awareness through this self-inquiry, we start to disidentify with those fleeting parts of our experience. We connect more deeply with that unchanging consciousness. It's like we're shifting perspective from the content of our experience to the container, the space where it's all happening.
I like that. That's a beautiful way to put it. And another powerful tool, of course, is meditation.
Meditation. It's funny, sometimes when I hear people talk about meditation, it sounds kind of mystical, almost esoteric. But if we tie it back to what we were just talking about, it makes perfect sense. If we want to explore our consciousness, we need to learn how to observe it, not get swept away by all the thoughts.
Exactly. Meditation, it helps train the mind to become stiller, more focused, more aware of its own nature.
Like building a mental muscle.
Right.
Strengthening our attention and clarity.
Right.
And I guess like any muscle, that takes time, effort to develop. I imagine there are days when our minds feel more like a chaotic jungle than some peaceful garden.
Absolutely. The mind's naturally active. It's normal to have distractions, get restless during meditation. The key is to be patient with ourselves, gently bring our attention back to the present moment. No judgment, no self-criticism.
So it's not about forcing the mind to be quiet, but having a more gentle, accepting relationship with it.
Yeah, precisely. And as we get better at meditation, we start experiencing those thoughts, emotions as just passing phenomena, like clouds moving across the sky. We can observe without getting caught up in the story, and that's where deeper insights can come in, a sense of inner peace.
Like we're watching the movie of our minds without getting lost in the plot.
Love that analogy. And, as we understand avidya better, we see how it shows up not just in meditation, but in everything. Our habits, our reactions, the stories we tell ourselves, how we interact with the world.
So it's not just about what happens on the meditation cushion, but bringing that same awareness to all our everyday experiences.
Exactly. And as we become more mindful of those patterns of avidya, then we can start to challenge them, transform them.
Okay, so self-inquiry, meditation, two big tools. Are there other things we can do to help us dismantle this avidya?
Advaita Vedanta also puts a lot of emphasis on ethical living, cultivating qualities like compassion, kindness, nonviolence.
And that makes sense, doesn't it? Like those qualities would naturally flow from a deeper understanding of how connected we all are. If we're all expressions of that boundless consciousness hurting someone else, it just doesn't compute.
Exactly. And it's not about being a good person for the sake of it. It's about creating the conditions for deeper understanding to emerge. When we're caught up in anger, greed, jealousy, it's like putting on blurry glasses. We can't see clearly.
So those negative emotions, they become their own kind of avidya in a way, obscuring our true nature and leading us to actions that just create suffering for everyone.
Yeah, you got it. And the more we can cultivate those positive qualities, the more space we create for wisdom, compassion, genuine connection to grow.
So it's not just about what we do in our